Well, I almost missed the grand tour, so I might as well jump on this big train and get to work. I think that's enough puns for the intro of this video. The Grand Tour by Big Train. So Big Train is a very interesting retro progressive rock band. They formed in the UK in the early 90s and really didn't get a whole lot of traction until probably in the later part of the 2000s. They had put out a number of albums in the 90s and the 2000s with a little bit of recognition, but for me it wasn't really until The Underfell Yard came out that I started to pay attention. After that, they blew me away full force with the English Electric Part 1. The follow-up to that English Electric Part 2 was good. It was good. I don't know if it was quite as much of an impact to me as it was with Part 1, but the full Electric, the album that kind of combines the two together, that was the one that I was just like, okay, we're working with something special here. The albums that kind of preceded this, Folklore, Grimspound, and The Second Brightest Star, they were kind of touch and go. I really enjoyed Folklore. It was a darker approach to this more very UK sounding presentation. I mean, if I were to equate this for anybody that isn't indoctrinated into the Big Train cult, it's very much the kind of intimate, acoustical, folky aspects of bands such as Genesis or Yes, kind of looking at like Steve Hackett, Steve Howe, Anthony Phillips for sure is a really big influence on these guys. And so now we're coming into the Grand Tour. And the Grand Tour is probably, just to kind of open it up and talk about it, it's probably the strongest work from them since the English Electric Part 2. It's got a really interesting structure, and I want to talk about the structure first because that was the thing that kind of put me off at the very beginning. My opinion of this album has wavered quite a bit, and I think part of that has to do with the structure. The overall structure is it starts off with two of our smaller tracks, a little bit of a longer track, and then a very large track at 13 minutes. So the first track of Novum Organum is just over 2 minutes. Then we have Alive, which is like the first real proper song at 4.5 minutes, and then Florentine comes in at 8 minutes, and it's almost like each song kind of doubles the runtime of the last, until we get into the Roman Stone, which is about 13.5 minutes. That is a really interesting way of opening up the album, but then from there, we kind of then pare down to Pantheon at 6 minutes, Theodosia in Green and Gold at 5 minutes, and then we come into the two really long tracks, both at about 14 minutes, with Ariel and Voyager, and then finally the home song at 5 minutes. So it's a really interesting kind of ebb and flow that these guys have in terms of the lengths of these songs. This is just my own way of structuring an album in my mind. I really like a clear-cut halfway mark, and if you don't have that, I'm kind of like lost. I'm like, well, I don't know where the touchstone is for this album. But I do like how it opens up within Alive, Florentine, and Novum Organum. At first, when I was first listening to this album, I thought that it was a little bit redundant because it felt like it had two opening tracks, and I thought that Florentine, although is a very amazing track, I felt like it kind of did what Alive was doing, and I was really hoping to get into Roman Stone right off the get-go, because Roman Stone is the bigger, like the first big track off of this album. And that's something that Big Train is always really good at, is mastering these more grandiose, large-scale tracks. And so, because of the presentation, there's really no track that stands out, and there are, like, each song has its moment that perks my ears up. There's something on each of these tracks I'm like, ooh, that was interesting, or ooh, that was a really fun build and payoff. And so in that sense, even though the structure for me is a little bit strange, and it is something I'm still kind of getting used to, I do appreciate that each song kind of has their own little nugget of gold in it. And the one that I can like pinpoint right off the get-go is Pantheon, the purely instrumental track off of this. And I do enjoy Pantheon being kind of a little bit of a interlude for the rest of the album. It's very grooving, it's very hard-hitting, and I love the complex rhythm styles and playing styles that we have on this track. The blending of all the different musicians kind of coming around was really, really fun. It almost reminds me of something that Beardfish would do. Rickard Solblum actually played. He was like the main creative drive for Beardfish. He was on the last couple of albums for Big Big Train. His influence was definitely felt on tracks like Pantheon. I also really enjoy some of the smaller moments on this. Home Song, Theodosia in Green and Gold, as well as the Florentine. I mean, the Florentine being the 8-minute track. I really like how intimate these tracks are. I really like how it brings the album down onto more of a personal level, because you do have those big grand scale tracks like The Roman Stone, like Ariel, and like Voyager, but these tracks also kind of ground the album in a very personal tone. And I really like how this idea of the Grand Tour, either it's, I have a feeling the Grand Tour is more of like, you know, King Alexander's big sweep, or it could be in the 1700s where youth from England would go and do the Grand Tour of England, or of Europe. So I think it's one of the, like, both are definitely found on here. But I do think it is the great Alexander's, or Alexander the Great's big quest, because I mean, on the front cover it's practically him with the lute there. These shorter tracks are those touchstones. Like, even though you're on this grand tour, these smaller tracks are the ones where you kind of just appreciate where you are on this journey. Now let's talk about those bigger tracks. Let's talk about the Roman Stone, the Ariel, and the Voyager. The only thing that I have as a negative against these is that if you were to put them on shuffle, I wouldn't really be able to tell you which one is which. Each of these tracks don't really have a clear identity about them. Each track doesn't really have a like a unique presentation about them that differentiates themselves from one another. I mean, that's the down point. The up point is the journey that these tracks go on. They balance very well at being that humble, personal, intimate tracks while also being very epic and grand in scale. And balancing these two can be very, very hard, because when you're dealing with such a big epic track like this, you can definitely lose sight of more of that singer-songwriter intimate aspects by dealing with such epic tales. And so, yeah, overall, I was very surprised about this album. When I first listened to it, I honestly wasn't all that excited, and I wasn't all that blown away by it. But the more I listened to it, the more I really started to fall in love with this album. And this is something that has happened with me and Big Big Train quite a bit. I can definitely see the Big Big Train fan base gushing about this track and this album. This album definitely has a lot of those stronger moments. They mastered the build-ups, they've mastered the payoffs in that sense, and it's a really, really fun grand tour. At the end of the day, this is a poster child for a download. This is one that I would 100% download, have it on my computer, have it on my travels. This is definitely one that I would take on vacation with me if I had like a really long road trip or something ahead of me, just to really appreciate not only the music but the landscapes that are surrounding me. And that's about it. That's about it for the Grand Tour by Big Big Train. What did you guys think? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Whatever it was, let me know by commenting down below. Thank you guys so much for watching. As always, you guys are definitely the best. And until next time, notes out.